We continue our study of the Gospel of Luke. We are in Luke 8. We left off with verse 16 last week. That's where we take up our study this morning. Jesus is telling a series of parables. And he says in verse 16, "Now no one, after lighting a lamp, covers it over with a container or puts it under a bed, but he puts it on a lampstand, so that those who come in may see the light." Very similar to what he says in the Sermon on the Mount as recorded in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Again, this points up to the fact that Jesus preached the same basic message everywhere he went, albeit in somewhat different forms wherever the circumstance dictated it or where the occasion was. So here he gives a very familiar parable of a lamp, but with a little bit of a different twist. He says in verse 17, "For nothing is hidden that will not become evident, nor anything secret that will not be known and come to light." Jesus here is referring to his own teaching. His teaching was not done in secret. That is to say, he didn't teach anything that only those who are very enlightened would know. That is, any kind of secret wisdom or secret truth. That stands in sharp contrast to what the Gnostics would claim in the end of the first century and into the second century. The Gnostics claimed that you had to achieve this secret truth by going through a series of stages. And when you got to the apex, you would be completely enlightened. Does that sound familiar? Every cult in the 20th to 21st century has that same kind of mentality. It goes back to the Gnostics. The Gnostics had that same mentality. The Gnostics claimed that there was a great demiurge, out of which emanated several eons, A-E-O-N-S. And if you knew, the word gnosis in the Greek is where Gnostic comes from, if you are one of the knowing ones, you would be spiritually enlightened. Well, Jesus right here blows that out of the way. He says, "Nothing is hidden that will not become evident, nor anything secret that will not be known and come to light." Jesus would later tell his accusers at the mock trial, "I've taught everything openly, nothing in secret. Ask anyone, they can tell you what I've taught." Jesus was very much open with what he said. Verse 18, and Mark's account actually adds that he says, "If any man has ears to hear, let him hear." And so now verse 18 of our text, "So take care how you listen. For whoever has, to him more shall be given. And whoever does not have, even what he thinks he has, shall be taken away from him." Isn't that interesting? He says, take care how you listen. The art of listening is a very fine art indeed, and it's one that all of us need to try to master. Everybody wants to talk. Relatively few want to really listen. And it takes a patient person in order to truly listen. One who is truly wanting to know what is so, what is true. We measure attention. Jesus measures knowledge. You can pay attention to someone and yet not learn. Well, Jesus doesn't just want us to pay attention to what he says. He wants us to know what he says. He measures knowledge. Take care how you listen. He is just in the earlier part of this chapter that we covered last week, talked about the parable of the sower and the seed, the Word of God, falling on the different types of soil. And the good ground is a person who hears the Word and keeps it in a good and honest heart, holds it fast, and bears fruit with patience. The person who really listens, the person who really hears, has a view toward doing what the Lord says. Take care how you listen. Any questions or comments before we move forward from this parable. Verse 19 says, "And his mother and brothers came to him, and they were unable to get to him because of the crowd." Notice, his mother and brothers. Our Roman Catholic friends claim that Jesus never had any earthly brothers or sisters because Mary, they say, was a perpetual virgin. Well, they're contradicted clearly by the text. The text clearly says that Jesus had other brothers. That would be James and Jude specifically. James and Jude would later become faithful disciples of Jesus. They would become leaders in the Lord's church in the first century. But at this point, James and Jude were not believers. They were not total believers in Jesus. And Mary was with them. Now at this point, if Mary was about 18 to 21 when she had Jesus, this would be about 30 years later. She would be around the age of 50. Somewhere between 50 and 55 years of age. In the first century, that was considered to be old. We don't consider it to be old, those of us who are of that age, but still, it was considered to be an elderly person if you were in your 50s because of the lifespan, the average lifespan of humans that existed in the first century. At any rate, the brothers, apparently, at this point, were taking care of Mary. And verse 20, it was reported to him, "Your mother and your brothers are standing outside wishing to see you." They want to see Jesus. We're not told the reason why. We're just told that they want to see him. But notice his response in verse 21. "But he answered and said to them, My mother and my brothers are these who hear the word of God and do it." That's a profound statement, isn't it? My mother and my brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it. This entire section, from the time he's talked about the parable of the sower until this point, Jesus has emphasized, he's stressed the importance of listening, hearing with a view toward doing, hearing with a view toward obeying. And he's again stressing that same point. And in the larger context of what Jesus says, he's talking about the church which he would establish, is he not? He's talking about the church which would come into existence in Acts 2. His brethren. We are the brothers and the sisters of Jesus. That's a high privilege when you think about it. Brethren, we are brothers and sisters to the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. Are you related to royalty, that is, physically speaking? Have you done your family tree? You know, a lot of people are interested in family trees. First 15 years of my life, my dad worked on the Hester family tree. He finished it, quote unquote, when I was 15 years old. He's kept on working on it the rest of his life. But he compiled the initial documents into a booklet, which I have at the house, by the way, as well as all of the rough draft of it. He did our family tree and traced our name all the way back, he said, to the Babylonian Empire. Don't ask me how. He just said he did. He traced our actual lineage back to the 1500s. We couldn't find any kings or queens anywhere in it, as far as I know. But even if you do have royal blood, physically speaking, within you, the most important thing is you have spiritual royal blood. You are a brother, you are a sister to Jesus Christ spiritually. That's the highest privilege, the highest honor that anyone could ever have in this life. At the previous congregation where I was before we came down here, there was a good friend of mine who was a lawyer up there in the Birmingham area who was physically related to Scottish royalty. And to this day, he still has a problem with the fact that his ancestors were overthrown. That they don't have their crown, their thrones, their castles, and all of that. It was always a joke with him. But still, we have spiritual royal blood coursing through us. And that is the highest honor that anyone could ever have. Now the scene shifts in verse 22. Now in one of those days, we're not told how long after this, again, Luke skips forward in his narrative and doesn't tell us specifics. Jesus and his disciples got into a boat. And he said to them, let us go over to the other side of the lake. This is, of course, the Sea of Galilee we're talking about. So they launched out. But as they were sailing along, he fell asleep. And a fierce gale of wind descended on the lake, and they began to be swamped and to be in danger. Notice this. They're sailing across the Sea of Galilee, and a sudden storm blows up. And if you know anything about the Sea of Galilee, about that region, you know that this is a very common occurrence. And so they're in the midst of that sea, and the storm comes up, and where is Jesus to be found? He's asleep. That always tickles me. Have you ever known somebody that could sleep through anything? Maybe you can sleep through anything. When I was at Freed Hardeman, I was in a singing group, the Sunshine Singers, and we would travel all across the Southeast and other places to go sing at different places. And so when we were on the tour bus traveling down the interstate, everybody else would be sound asleep and I'd be wide awake. And then, as we were getting close to our destination, when everybody's up and bustling about and talking, I'd fall rock solid asleep. I'd be sleeping through the whole thing, where everybody bustling, talking, and yelling and everything. But perhaps you've known somebody that can sleep through anything. Jesus could sleep through a storm. Jesus was asleep in the midst of the storm. What a picture that is. The Son of God. And in the midst of this peril, they think, he's sacked out. Sacked out in the ship asleep. They came to Jesus and woke him up, saying, Master, Master, we are perishing. We're perishing. We're going to sink. And he got up and rebuked the wind and the surging waves, and they stopped, and it became calm. Picture it again in your mind. Jesus gets up off of his bed there in the midst of the ship, goes up to the top, and rebukes the sea, rebukes the winds, and it stops. And the lake becomes as still and as calm as you can see. Would that grab your attention? You better believe it would. And notice the reaction. What Jesus says, verse 25. He said to them, where is your faith? They were fearful and amazed, saying to one another, who then is this, that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him? The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. That song we have sung many, many times over the years, and it should give us a calm in our mind and our soul, knowing that Jesus can still the storms of life. Storms are going to come. It's inevitable. Storms will come in anyone's life, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, whether it's external, whether it's internal. The storms are going to come. Jesus never promises us that it's going to be a bed of roses all the way to heaven. He never did. He's told us up front there would be difficult times. If you live any length of time in this earth, you know that to be the case. And if you haven't experienced it yet, you will. Everyone does. How do we react to it? Are we going to panic like the disciples? Master, Master, we're perishing. I'm perishing in what I'm going through right now. I don't know how I can get through it. And what does Jesus do? He says, where is your faith? And if we will allow Jesus to calm the stormy seas, if we will allow him to rebuke the winds that are in our life that's troubling us, if we'll allow him to do it, he'll calm the seas. He'll calm the winds. He will calm our lives. Somebody says, that's easy for you to say. If you've gone through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. When those tough times come, who is the only person that you can really rely upon 100% to know that that person can get you through? The only person that can get you through anything in this life is Jesus Christ. That's the only one. If we hear Him and listen and obey Him, we can make it through anything. We can make it through any troubling time. Jesus is able and willing to do it. Are we willing and able to turn everything over to Him? That's the question. That's what Jesus is wanting us to do. Turn everything over to Him. Let Him handle it. He's got this. We don't necessarily have it. Jesus does. He can do it for us. Any questions, comments before we once again move forward? Verse 26. Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. That was where they were going in this ship. And when he came out onto the land, he was met by a man from the city who was possessed with demons. Notice, demons, plural. This one man possessed by demons. And who had not put on any clothing for a long time. It was not living in a house, but in the tombs. I don't know if you enjoy superhero movies or fantasy shows or whatever, and you'll see sometimes in these movies and television shows these evil people that hang around grave sites and have extraordinary powers. Here's someone who really had extraordinary power, as you're going to see, who lived in the tombs. Seeing Jesus, or verse 28, seeing Jesus, he cried out and fell before him and said in a loud voice, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." He addresses Jesus appropriately. What he said about Jesus was true. Jesus is the Son of the Most High God, but Jesus could not accept testimony from demons. We know that. He's already indicated that previous. But yet the demons acknowledge Jesus' authority. The demon world acknowledges who Jesus is. Explanation given in verse 29. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Jesus sees him. He commands the unclean spirit to come out. He doesn't want to. Notice, it said earlier, demons. We're going to see how many here in a moment. For it had seized him many times, and he was bound with chains and shackles and kept under guard, and yet he would break his bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Think about this now. They've tried to restrain this guy with chains and ropes. He's bound securely, they think, and all of a sudden what happens? Bam! He comes out of it. A real-life Superman. But he's not good. These demons aren't good, but they're giving him this tremendous strength that he's able to break the bonds of anyone that tries to restrain him. And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion." For many demons had entered him. Think about this, brethren. A legion of soldiers is about 6,000 soldiers. 6,000 demons are in this man. That's unreal. We're not told how big this man was. He could very well have been a very average-sized person. I've always had in my mind that this guy probably was of big stature. He was above average in stature. He may very well not have been, but that's how I've always pictured him. 6,000 demons in this guy. Tremendous number. They were imploring him not to command them to go away into the abyss. The abyss. Intriguing statement, what Luke says here. Guy Woods wrote extensively about the demon world and spirit possession in his Questions and Answers Volume 1, Open Forum book. If you have it, it's a tremendous resource. I think Gospel Advocate still produces it. He talks about this at length, and I tend to agree with Brother Woods on his assessment of who the demons were. I won't go into that in detail. But the abyss here apparently refers to the Hadean realm, that is, the place of torment that Jesus would later describe, as we'll see in Luke 16. He wanted to send them back from where they came, into torment. They were imploring him not to do that. Verse 32. Now there was a herd of many swine feeding there on the mountain. And the demons implored him to permit them to enter the swine. Cast us into the pigs. This herd of pigs, cast us in those pigs. And he gave them permission. Notice, Jesus gave them permission. He was in control of the situation. He would not allow those demons to enter any other person, but he would allow them to enter these pigs. And the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. All these pigs. Think about this herd of pigs that are running down a bank, and they all fall down into the sea. All that bacon, all that pork, all that barbecue. Anyway, all those pigs go into the sea, and they perish. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they ran away and reported it in the city and out in the country. The people went out to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting down at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they became frightened. Notice the contrast of this man. Earlier, he had been naked and completely out of his mind because of the demon possession. And now that the demons are cast out, what do we find? He's clothed and in his right mind. One of the lessons we can draw from that is, when you're in your right mind, you won't go out in public with no clothes on. Now that's simple, isn't it? But it makes sense. I mean, why would you want to go out in public with not wearing any clothes? But yet, how often do we see around us people at Walmart and people at different places where we go to shop, and they might as well not have any clothes on? And when you go down the beach, what happens? Clothes come off. It happens all too often. When you're in your right mind, Luke says, you got clothes on. But that's the minor point to draw from this. The demons are out of him. He's now calm. Everything is right with him, and it's because of Jesus. Those who had seen it reported to them how the man who was demon-possessed had been made well, and all the people of the country, the Gerasenes, and the surrounding district asked him to leave them, for they were gripped with great fear. And he got into a boat and returned. They weren't happy. That's a puzzling reaction, isn't it? To us, at least. They should have been extremely ecstatic that this man had been healed, that these demons were gone. No, they were afraid of Jesus. The mentality was wrong here. But the man from whom the demons had gone out was begging him that he might accompany him. He wanted to go along with Jesus, but he sent him away, saying, "Return to your house and describe what great things God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Jesus saw that this man would be far more effective here at home, proclaiming Jesus throughout the region. And indeed, that's what he does. Sometimes we are more effective where we are than in going some other place. Some folks are far more effective going overseas to evangelize. Some are far more effective here at home evangelizing. We need to bloom where we've been planted, in essence. And that's what this man was asked to do by Jesus. Any questions, comments, anything before we move forward once again? Yes? The second question I'll answer first. When the pigs died, they obviously went back to the abyss because that's where Jesus wanted to cast them out to. As to the first question, how did they get out of the abyss in the first place? That's a very interesting question. It could take us the rest of the time and next week and 2 Sundays from now talking about the details. I love talking about that. There's a difference of opinion as to who the demons were. There are those that would claim that they were angels, the fallen angels that came along with, if you believe that Satan was a fallen angel, and again, that's another whole area of study. I believe that Satan is a fallen angel. He's not on the same level as God, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Still, there are those that believe that the demons are angels that have fallen. I don't subscribe to that. The demons, I believe, as Brother Woods tried to point out in his book, I believe the demons were evil spirits allowed to be released from the Hadean realm. As to why they were done that way, to demonstrate the power of Jesus over the power of Satan, for one thing. As far as demon possession, that was something unique, as far as I can tell, to the first century. You don't really see demon possession as such in the Old Testament. We see it in the Gospels. We see it in the book of Acts, and it's there for a specific purpose. Jesus and his disciples are demonstrating God's authority over all things, spirit realm included. And Jesus, of course, has the spirit without measure, without limit. He could do whatever he pleased as far as limiting or destroying those demons or casting them back into the abyss. So that would be my sort of summary response. As far as the demon world, the spirit world, demon possession, that's something that, we could take a whole quarter talking about, and it would be a fascinating study, by the way, but I appreciate it. Appreciate that. All right, so, moving forward, verse 40, as Jesus returned, the people welcomed him, and for they had all been waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue. And he fell at Jesus' feet and began to implore him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, and she was dying. But as he went, the crowds were pressing against him. Now this entire section from verse 40 to verse 56 is told in 3 parts. This is the prologue. We're going to have a side issue that from verses 43 to 48, and then we come back to the main thrust of the section in verse 49. So the prologue is Jairus comes to and begs him to heal his only daughter, his 12-year-old only daughter who was dying. And so he goes in that direction, and the crowd is just pressing against him. So big a crowd of people that want to see and hear Jesus that it's difficult for him to actually move. Have you ever been in a crowd like that? If you're claustrophobic, that is a nightmare for you, isn't it? But if you're not claustrophobic, if you've been in that kind of crowd before, you know how just daunting that can be. So he goes forward, and that brings us to the side narrative, verse 43. And a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and could not be healed by anyone came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. We're not told exactly where that hemorrhage was. Luke, being a physician, specifies what was wrong with her, a hemorrhage. He doesn't specify the location of it. So it's up to us to speculate. At any rate, she had a bleeding problem of some sort, whether it's internal or external. And Jesus said, "Who is the one who touched me? Who is the one who touched me?" Why did Jesus say that? Well, he had a moral purpose in asking. He had a point in asking the question. Mark's account tells us that he perceived power going forth from him. Jesus could tell the healing power was going out. Jesus was that powerful. He was that powerful as far as miraculous is concerned. And while they were all denying it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing in on you. Peter's just, you've got all these people are pressing in on you. You want to know who touched you? There's a lot of people touching you, Peter has going through his mind, obviously. But Jesus said, someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had gone out of me. When the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell down before him and declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. Now, according to the law of Moses, if you had a hemorrhage of this nature, you were considered unclean. And so this woman knew the ramifications of her coming out in public saying that she has a hemorrhage. So she confesses it to Jesus. And he said to her, Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. She obviously had seen Jesus from a distance healing all of these people, performing all these miracles. She obviously thought within herself, if I can just come and touch his clothes, I'll be healed. She had that much faith in the power of Jesus. Now, it is not the case that every miracle performed by Jesus and the apostles was contingent upon the faith of the person doing it. The so-called faith healers of today make that mistake and saying, well, if you're not healed, it's because you don't have enough faith. No. There were people healed in the first century that demonstrated no faith at all in God or Christ, and yet they were healed regardless. They came to faith afterward. But in this case, this woman has faith in the healing power of Jesus, and that faith heals her. Now we come back to the main thrust of this section. While he was still speaking, as he was saying these words, someone came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, Your daughter has died. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. She's been at the point of death. Now she's passed. But when Jesus heard this, he answered him, Do not be afraid any longer. Only believe and she will be made well. When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the girl's father and mother. We're going to see this again. Peter, John, and James. This was the inner three of the 12 disciples. You have the 12 disciples, apostles of Jesus. And then the inner three are Peter, James, and John. And of those three, John in his gospel indicates there was that disciple whom Jesus loved. By the process of elimination, we can deduce that that is John, the apostle. John, the apostle, was closest to Jesus of any of the apostles, as far as a friend. But yet this inner circle, this inner three, was with Jesus at specific occasions, this being one of them. Now they were all weeping and lamenting for her. But he said, Stop weeping, for she has not died, but is asleep. Well, of course she's died. We're told that she's dead. But Jesus uses this terminology, she is asleep, as a way to calm the fears, calm the emotions. The idea that Jehovah's Witnesses have of soul sleeping is simply an unscriptural, unbiblical doctrine. It is not given any support by this passage. Jesus is using a term to try to change people's minds and change people's emotions. But obviously she's dead. And they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. So they start laughing. Are you saying she's asleep? She's dead. He, however, took her by the hand and called, saying, Child, arise. And her spirit returned, And she got up immediately. And he gave orders for something to be given her to eat. No telling how long she's been without food, by the way. So now she's raised up from the dead. She's in good health. Verse 56, her parents were amazed. But he instructed them to tell no one what had happened. Keep this to yourself, in other words. Now all everybody knows that she's been sick to the point of death and now she's alive. Jesus is the one that's responsible for that. Jesus could never countenance someone dead being around him. Have you ever noticed that in the gospel accounts? Every time a dead body comes near, Jesus raises that person from the dead. Death is the enemy of God. 1 Corinthians 15, the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Our AD 70 friends say, no, death is the friend of God. It's the friend of Jesus. Nope, death is the enemy of God. It's the enemy of Christ. And so Jesus raises people from the dead physically, and most importantly, he raises us from the dead spiritually when we obey him. Any questions, comments before we move into the next chapter? We've got a few minutes left. Yes?
David, talking about him expelling demons out of man, don't return and tell everyone. Yet here at the end of this, he says, tell no one.
You know, there's been a lot of ink spilled and a lot of articles written by a lot of scholars as to the so-called Messianic Secret. And there's been a lot of reasons given as to why Jesus told people to keep it a secret on certain occasions. I think we can fairly deduce from the text the reasons for him telling the man who had the demons cast out of him to tell it, and why he told them not to. In the first case, this man had been very public. Everybody knew about this man. Everybody knew that he was possessed because of how he went about things, breaking the bonds that were attempted to restrain him. He would say his name to Jesus, Legion, we are many, demons. And yet in this case, this young child, this girl, was sick to the point of death, and then the servant comes and tells Jesus, or tells Jairus and Jesus, that she has died. The people there at the house know that she's dead, but as far as it being widely publicized, as far as we can tell from the text, it's not. This is just my thinking. Jesus tells them not to tell anyone, simply the fact that it's something that he did for this family. But the bigger miracle, that is, if you want to call it bigger, him healing Lazarus or raising Lazarus from the dead, will happen later. And that would be open before all. He'd be dead for 3 days. Maybe Jesus is wanting to keep this from being circulated so the power of that miracle, the healing of Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, would be even more powerful. It's just a matter of speculation. For lack of a better response, I could say simply, I don't know. I've gone all the way around the world to say I don't know. I should have said that in the first place, right? Well, still, there's a lot of reasons given. Yes, sir.
Could it be that Jesus had compassion on this young lady, this child, did not want her to be I won't say center of attention, but be the obstacle of vision? I'm telling you what could have been said.
That could very well be the answer. In fact, I'm more tending to believe that that would be the case, even than what I just speculated on. Any way you go about it, it's speculation because the text doesn't specify, but I would more tend to believe that version. In other words, that he did not want this girl to be unduly pressed, become really the focus of attention, as you pointed out. I can see that easily. For whatever reason, he tells the family not to publicize it. And he tells, of course, obviously individuals the same kind of thing. Don't tell anyone who I am. Yes?
Had he been doing this to show off, as we sometimes say, which he obviously wasn't doing, he would have wanted it.
Oh, yeah. If he wanted all this fame to himself, he'd say, go and tell it as far as you can. Tell everybody. No, he says, don't. That's counterintuitive to human logic and reasoning, you know. Jesus didn't want all the accolades for himself. He didn't want to live high on the hog while everybody else was in abject misery and poverty. Jesus didn't go about things like that. I keep on thinking about this documentary series I'm watching. It's just amazing to me, this cult that came into Oregon and almost took over the state. This guy, this Swami Rajneesh, was just unreal. This guy was just a charlatan. But he wanted to live high on the hog while everybody else is just down here. Well, Jesus was not like that at all. He was a man of the people, yes. He was the Son of Man, but he was most importantly the Son of God. All right, we've got maybe 3 minutes. Go ahead. Yes.
You've often said that Jesus had a real sense of humor. I think that when he put those demons into the pigs are anti-Jews, that they will not eat pigs. He had fun throwing them into the pigs and getting rid of them. And I think that we are here too, as these were probably Romanized Jews that were taking care of these crazy people to cut their income.
Yes, you've got all these other things that are going on in the background, and Jesus, I can see that, how Jesus would have had fun with that. You know, these unclean animals that were making money for these Hellenized Jews, and now they're gone, cutting off their source of funding. You know, when you cut off somebody's source of funding, that grabs attention, doesn't it? You cut off the money supply, that gets people upset. Perhaps that's one big reason why they wanted Jesus to go out from them. Not just because they were afraid. Here's their money, and it's gone. All that bacon, all that barbecue, all that ham, it's all gone. Jesus never could eat ham, barbecue, pork, bacon. Isn't that something? Yet he couldn't because it's unclean. Yes. Yes.
You know, God sent his Son into the world in the fullness of time. God was concerned about the right time. And Jesus was concerned about the right time for things he did. He had a purpose in what he did. And apparently, it did not serve his purpose at that particular time for this thing to be made known.
And that's another big reason, too. It wasn't the right time to publicize this. All of these factors could play a part into why Jesus told them not to say anything. So you've got all these things going on in the background. Luke tells us as much as we need to know, and what is not told is something we can speculate about. And when we go to heaven after we die, we can ask Luke himself and ask the Lord himself and get the answers that we need. This is where we'll stop, and we'll take up our study next week. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Before we... Yeah, Deuteronomy 29:29, very appropriate way to end our study this morning.